I think the most pressing issue in all areas, whether it's about work, whether it's about politics, whether it's about social policy, is gender equality. If you think of the one issue which could make a difference across the board, it would be gender equality. You'd actually seen a steady increase in measures towards gender equality up until around 1980, 1985, in terms of income distribution, political participation, and then it stalls. So some people call it the stalled revolution. So I mean that would be the area, regardless. That would be the issue, regardless of what area of research you're in. That would make a big difference.
So one of the issues for me when I think about cities, and this is going to be present in the work that I want to do with our chapter, is that up to 100 years ago, from the Western perspective, the frontier was at the edges of empires. Today, there are no more edges of empires. Today, the frontier is in our global cities. That is the space where actors from very different worlds have an encounter for which there are no established rules of engagement. That is what the global city also is. And in that sense, the global city is both a platform that facilitates the financializing of economies, the extraction of natural resources that go to whatever the highest bidder. But on the other side, it is a place, and eventually it becomes one of the few places, any big city, not only global, where those without power have at least the option of putting down their tent, so to say. And politically speaking, to me, critical element, there is this encounter between people from different worlds. And when you throw in that wider world, that for me is critical to understand the city. Think of land grabs in the global south. That is just, increasing. Millions of people are being displaced from their rural settings. You replace little rural economies with vast plantations, which also means that the earth is going to die much sooner, which also means that they're going to move and grab another piece of land. Where do those people go? A big city is one of the last places where they can go. They can't just plant themselves down in suburbs, in neat suburbs, or in small provincial towns. It's the big anarchic city. So the global city is this extraordinarily complex, multivalent. It's not simply great, nor is it simply very bad. It is a mix. It's a combat zone also.
My role here is to participate to chapter 4, which is on growth or no growth. Probably one big question there is whether sustainable growth is something feasible and or desirable. As a specialist of theories of growth, I think I can contribute to highlight some mechanisms that were important in the past, wonder whether they will still be relevant in the future. And I would also like to introduce some demographic elements, because I think population is something very important, both in the past and in the future. The point we are now in the chapter, we said, okay, let us be very clear about the different views of the world one could have. For example, there is probably the classical view would be that technology will solve many problems, growth will continue, it will allow poor countries to catch up, we can redistribute the product of that growth, reducing inequalities. That's one paradigm. And within that paradigm, there are some policy implications. But there are other paradigms. For example, the people coming from the environment literature, they face the question whether there is a limit to growth coming from the environment and climate change and so on. And this points to a model where maybe we will reach maximum income, and maybe at some point income will decrease because of all the bad effects on climate. So we call that a Malthusian model, where we grow and then at some point we degrow and we go back to a kind of quite bad situation. So that paradigm, which is very different from the first one, will also require some specific policies, which might be the same. Some could be the same across the two paradigms, some could be different. And so we would like to look at that. And then a third paradigm that is gaining weight recently, I think, it's a kind of Marxist paradigm, stressing that growth now is accompanied by rising inequalities, and that is not sustainable. So we should do something about this gap between the top 0.1% in a given society and the rest. Otherwise, we will run into social difficulties and maybe a revolution, and then the old Marx is coming back. And then that also calls for specific redistribution policies and so on. Maybe that would not be advisable in another paradigm.
The definition, the idea that we have also of social progress has deeply changed in the past decades. Until a few decades ago, progress was mainly material progress, basically having more money. And now we are realizing that that's not all that matter. There are other very important dimensions of progress that matter, because there are other important dimensions of well-being. The studies on well-being show that the most important thing in creating people's happiness is the quality of their personal, intimate or social relationships, and that matters more than their economic or material affluence. And the data also show that countries that had an enormous economic growth in the past decades, both in the developed or developing world, as the US or China or India, suffered from very deep diminutions of well-being, very big drops, especially in China and India, which is very surprising because those countries were very poor. Big segments of the population are still very poor, but the greater part of the population experience an enormous increase in their affluence, and they are more unhappy. And the reason is that the quality of social relationship worsened dramatically, both in the US, China, and also in India. Families are more unstable, people mistrust each other, loneliness has become a mass problem, especially in the US. Honesty, solidarity declined very sharply in all these countries. Social engagement, civic participation, all these measures show sharp declines, and this is the reason why well-being declined in this country. So the message of all these examples is that what is important is not economic growth, but the social quality of economic growth. If the price of economic growth is, the price to be paid is to reduce society to a desert, then it's not worth from the point of view of well-being. So we should pay more attention to social and relational dimensions of well-being.
You know, I don't want to pretend that migration is the most important topic. I think it's just a part of the very large-scale transformations we're experiencing in world economy and world societies at the moment. So that we have to understand migration really as part of the process of social transformation rather than as something in itself. And I think that's what I would like to bring into the International Panel on Social Progress.